Today we are going to see about perceptual disorders and their assessment. Now, what should you know at the end of this short course on perceptual disorders? First, we are going to learn what is the difference between a sensation and perception. You will have to know what are the 4 different types of perceptual disorders that can happen in a person with a brain damage. We are also going to know how are these 4 different types of perceptual disorder going to manifest itself. There are many forms in which they can manifest, so each of them have different subtypes, and we are going to see them. What are the subtypes of the primary perceptual disorders? And lastly, concomitantly, we will also be looking into how to evaluate these disorders. I'm going to present it as a 4-part lecture, where in the first part I'm just going to give a brief introduction about the perceptual disorders, its importance to us. In the next part, we'll be looking into one of the primary disorder called body image disorder, and then we'll be looking into spatial relation disorder in a second video, and then in the last video we'll be looking into a group of disorders called agnosias and apraxias. Now let's get on into the introductory part of this. First is, we all need to understand that a perception is different from a sensation. Sensation normally comes through our visual system or tactile system or our auditory system or through our taste and smell. But all these sensation, as we know from prior understanding of the nervous system, goes via the receptors through the ascending tracts and the tracts which are there in the brain. They're going to enter and they go to a place called thalamus, which is called as a sensor integration center, and finally they are relayed onto the cerebral cortex. Now, when we tell a problem with the sensation is there, we normally mean that there is a problem in either the tissues, peripheral tissues, say for example there is a defect in your eye, or in your taste buds, or the problem could be there in the pathways which collect the impulses and carry it onto your brain. But when we tell a perception, it is not about sensation, it's about interpretation of the sensation. For example, let's take, I want all of you to look into your hand. When you look into your hand, you can see that it's a hand, or it could mean 5 because you have kept your 5 fingers open. Or you could be reading your palm. So, although we are seeing at one point of time only one image into our brain about the hand, still there are multiple meanings to it. So, depending on the situation, when people look into a particular object, they might perceive or they might interpret it differently. You might have had quite a lot of personal difference in opinion about interpreting a certain WhatsApp message or a certain thing which you have seen in your environment. I would ask you to pause this video and think about something which you interpreted and your friend interpreted differently in recent times. Yeah. I hope now you would got some examples of how the same thing can be perceived differently by different people. So, what's the difference between a sensation and perception? Perception is interpretation or making meaning out of the sensation, and this interpretation predominantly happens in a brain region called as the parietal cortex. Now, what happens in between the parietal cortex and the sensory inputs? Say for example, I want you to look in front of you. You might be having an object. Now I'm having an object here in front of me, which is a bottle which contains 4 biscuits. Right? Now in this bottle, I see that it's a transparent bottle and it has a cap. The cap is red in color, and inside that I see there are four objects. These four objects are square in shape, they are brown in color. So what happens is the sensory inputs from different parts of the body start moving in like this. It is not that you get an image of the bottle which is in front of you directly gets into your brain, but it goes in bits and pieces of information. So your rods and cones are capable of collecting certain features from the environment and sending it. But once it goes in, all these things have to be put together, and that's the function of your parietal cortex, and that's what we call as perception. So if there is a problem in putting together of all the different components of the inputs which are going in, like the color, the shape of it, the size of it, if there is a difficulty in putting all of them together, we might have a problem in perceiving. So this is the primary difference between a sensory and a perception. Now, what are the categories of perceptual disorder? Perceptual disorders are of many categories. The first category is a body scheme or a body image disorder. Primarily, what you have a problem with is you might be having a problem in identifying a particular body part, for example. So if you ask your patient to tell which is his right hand, he might not be able to tell. He might be showing his left hand, or he might be showing his shoulder, he might be showing a different part. That's called as a body scheme or body image disorder. The second group of disorders are called as spatial relation disorders. Now, what's a spatial relation? When you get out of this mobile and when you start looking into a table in front of you or anything in front of you, you know that there are multiple objects in front of you. Now, all of them are not on the same plane or aligned in one particular axis, but you see that some objects are in front, some objects are in back, some objects are to the left of that particular object and the other objects are to the right. So that's called as a spatial relation disorder. If a person has a difficulty in identifying which is in front and which is in back, then we can tell that he's having a spatial relation disorder. The next is agnosia. Agnosia primarily means there is a difficulty in discriminating between two similar things. Say, for example, you show a pen and you show a brush to a patient with agnosia. He is going to misunderstand that a pen could be a brush, and he is going to use a brush in order to write. So that's an example of agnosia. Finally, the last type of perceptual disorders which is known is apraxia. Now, praxis is ability to perform a coordinated movement, and apraxia refers to inability to perform coordinated movements despite not having any problem with the movement. So that's apraxia. So to summarize, we have four categories of perceptual disorders. They are body scheme and body image disorders, spatial relation disorders, agnosias and apraxias. Example of body scheme and body image disorder could be a unilateral neglect, where a person could be neglecting one side of his own body, or for example a finger agnosia, where the person might be having a lot of difficulty in telling which is his index finger and which is his little finger. Spatial relation disorder can be of 6 different varieties. One is figure ground discrimination. In this, the person fails to understand what is in the foreground and what is in the background. Say, for example, on a table you have a paper and a notebook. The paper is above the notebook and it's partially exposed. So the person might tell that the notebook is the one which is there on the foreground and the paper is in the background, while in reality it might not be so. So that's called as a spatial relation disorder. So a topographic disorientation is a very interesting disorder, of course interesting for a physiotherapist but not for a patient. Now, a topography is the ability to understand the map or geographical location of different things. So, if a patient is having a topographic disorientation, if you leave him in some place, he might be finding it very, very difficult to return back to his original place from where he had left. So, that's an example of a spatial relation disorder in our day-to-day life. Agnosias, as I said, is inability to discriminate between closely related things, and it could affect your vision, auditory or tactile. Say for example, auditory agnosia could be a person might be finding it very difficult to differentiate between a mobile ringing and a doorbell ringing. So that's an example of an agnosia. Now, apraxia are of three different types. One is ideomotor apraxia, second is ideational apraxia, and the third one is constructional apraxia. So we'll be looking into it, what is apraxia and what are the different types of apraxia in one of the later lectures. So in the next video, we are going to look into body scheme or body image disorder, which is the first perceptual problem. Thank you.